In August 2022, my brothers, our friend Bill, and I traveled to Glacier National Park to backpack what is referred to as the North Circle Loop. Parking about 6 a.m. in the East Glacier Hotel parking lot, we loaded our packs and headed for the Ptarmigan Trailhead and the beginning of our 65-mile journey. Leaving the pavement and quickly climbing up the namesake trail, we found day hikers amused, at what would become quite routine to us anyway, at the sighting of a grizzly bear high above the trail browsing for huckleberries. Just a few minutes later, we would have our first real intimate encounter with another grizzly, this time on the trail heading towards us. Although we had watched the mandatory video regarding backcountry bear preparedness, correctly answered the ranger's questions about how to manage these situations, and had come to this area with prior experience in bear country, we could not experiment with that knowledge until that moment on the trail. Alarmed, we quickly and rather panically unholstered our bear spray, made our presence known, and moved out of the predator's way. Soon enough, the bear was beyond us and off on the trail again to provide undoubtedly the same hair-raising experience for the group below us. Climbing higher on this steep trail, a few hours later, past the view of the hotel and Swift Current Lake, we rose above the forest, past what's left of a small snowdrift, found Ptarmigan Lake, and ultimately made our way through the tunnel that bears the trail's name. Built in the 1930s, it enables hikers, pack animals, and park management access through the peak of the range and to the valley below. The view after passing through reveals Elizabeth Lake, 2,700 feet below, our path down to it, and many other peaks, glaciers, and valleys made available to our eyes by the exceptionally clean air. Since there aren't major cities in this part of the country, and few wildfires during our visit, we had an unfettered panorama for 100 miles, it seemed. Making our way down towards the lake, the trail descended a mountainside of red shale, easy to navigate, but reminded us how easily it might be to slide down to the water if we weren't careful. Lower now, we were back in the trees and the waist-high thick brush I would eventually love to hate. Comprised of beargrass, thimbleberry, black huckleberry, and maidenhair fern, the bushwhacking, the leg scratches, the rustling noise, the way it could enable a bear to ambush a weary hiker, the humidity in the bushy zones, and good grief, the mosquito it breeds. It made my relationship with the jungle-like areas a struggle. Judging by the amount of bugs Billy involuntarily ingested, I think he shared my sentiment. We crossed an excellent suspension bridge and continued on to the lake. Arriving at our first night's camp, taking one of the two unoccupied sites, we set up our home for the night. I headed to the lake to soak my sore feet, while the rest of our group made their way to the food prep area. After dinner, we skipped rocks across the lake. Exhausted, I think we may have all been asleep before dark. Morning, our second day, we packed up after breakfast and headed out towards Dawn Mist Falls, about 1.5 miles from Elizabeth Lake. Later, we would ford the foot of Cosley Lake and eventually make our way to Glens Lake. When we arrived at camp, we discovered that all 3 sites were occupied. After a few moments' discussion and conference with the present campers, it was alleged that the tents pitched on what would be our site were likely left by climbers who hadn't returned yet. Moments later they appeared, apologized, broke their camp, and made their space ours. We filled our water bags at the lake while they worked, set the tent, and visited the food prep area. We made friends with 2 young men, a park ranger at Zion and his companion. They obtained walk-up permits for a hike similar to ours, though clockwise or reverse of our itinerary in the Circle Loop. We listened to an Ed Abbey spoken word essay as we drifted to sleep. Our third morning, not too strenuous as I remember, over a pass and down to Stony Indian Lake, where we refilled water and ate lunch. Afterwards, we continued to Kootenai Lake and camp. Lots of brush today, most bugs so far, and a black bear, apparently just for me. I was lagging behind as usual, my feet swollen and sore, and humbled by the humidity, warmth, and abundant brush, I was surprised by the beast on the right of the trail. For the first time, apparently, as Joe would remind me, I said, "Hey, bear," which he immediately knew meant an actual bear. Up to that point, I'd encouraged us to devise our own call to these wild animals. "Cold beer here," or "Aw, yeah," something unique to the "Hey, bear" the generic video and rangers instructed us to use. Anyway, as I can now attest, in the moment, your subconscious takes over, and for me, my alarm and surprise was publicly addressed to the others. Joe turned to see what unfolded. As I continued along the path, the bear seemed reluctant at first to pass me by, even coming towards me it seemed for a brief minute. Then, ultimately, going across the path and away from our party. I regret I didn't get a video of that moment. We regrouped at Kootenai Lake, made our camp, and settled in. This lake was warmer and seemed more populous than the previous two. Several anglers were trying their luck while I rested my feet in the water and sunk into happy hour. More densely forested and surrounded by the aforementioned brush, the bugs were thick and necessitated our repellent. After dinner, we made a small permissible campfire of dry spruce and fir branches, which may have reduced the pests, while it certainly entertained us. That night, maybe it was early morning, I dreamt the fauna got a hold of our food bags, and even carefully untying it, I imagined, and lowered it to the ground. Awakened by the prospect, I sat up and listened for the sounds of a bear or wolverine tearing open my dehydrated chili mac and beef and ingesting it as I had hours earlier. I called out. Billy was also awake, and he reassured me that it was just my subconscious. Grateful for his opinion, I fell back asleep. We slept like sardines in our little tent, the four of us. Each night, rainfly that is, in the hot and clear early August summer. Many thanks to Billy for outfitting us with our tent and the research he did in finding us the right one for us brutes. The Glacier backcountry permit process reduces each group to a maximum of 2 tents. To maintain our camaraderie and address the possibility of rain, we opted for one large tent that would enable us all to share the burden of its weight and provide a social atmosphere for games and chit-chat in case of a wet evening. Needless to say, it also began brewing a stew of our collective odors, a proprietary repellent we could bottle against humans, though it seemed effective on bears too. But not on deer. On our 4th night at 50 Mountain, the deer were more abundant than the campers. We were encouraged to urinate on hard ground rather than the vegetation, because the deer will seek the salts it contains and destroy the plants and dig at the adjacent soil. The camp pit toilet at 50 Mountain has a 360-degree panorama. In fact, the broken seat enabled the user to rotate, if inspired during elimination, on the plastic stool it rested on. There were reports of bear activity at 50 Mountain Camp. Yellow placards attested to their presence and urged caution, though we never saw any. A couple from Wisconsin we met at the camp food prep area shared that they saw a mother and 2 sows earlier in the nearby meadow. I didn't share their enthusiasm for the bears, as we'd already had nearly 3 encounters by this time, and had decided we'd be happy seeing no other bears along our way. 50 Mountain had abundant sunshine and views of the horizon because of a large wildfire in 2013. Although we'd had enough of the sun along the trail that day, the openness helped chronicle the sunset and provided an even more dramatic backdrop for the sunrise. We woke up on our 5th morning aware of the strenuous hike before us. The day's walk would take us down to Cattle Queen Snowdrift and the Ahern Drift.
I would do this in skis.
While the park rangers assured us the dangerous Ahern Drift had been shoveled clear for hikers, they made no mention of the Cattle Queen. When we arrived at the first drift, we scouted up and down the canyon for a reasonable way around it. No obvious path had been established across it. After some deliberation and an effort to find safe passage, I called out to a couple I observed enjoying lunch high above the canyon. They yelled back that they'd simply followed the imaginary line of the existing trail across the snow slowly and successfully. Encouraged by their answer, Billy, then Tim, Joe, and myself cautiously made our way across the slippery slope. Later at the Ahern Drift, we easily passed through the path cleared by the trail crews. The reward afterwards was the hike along the edge of the escarpment, typical of the Highline Trail's garden wall portion we would have to explore on another trip. Several miles and hours later, we would make it to Granite Camp and a brief view of the namesake chalet. At Granite Camp, we had to descend a few hundred feet to the sights, which was discouraging since we knew we'd have to undo the effort in the morning. Furthermore, as had been the case at 50 Mountain, there was little water, and it took additional effort to gather. I was grateful it was there, however challenging it seemed. We had some of the same company at Granite Camp as we had at 50 Mountain. Being younger than us, they arrived to camp earlier despite starting their morning later than us. On our last morning, we made our way to Granite Park Chalet. Constructed in the 1930s to encourage tourism via the recently completed Northern Railway, the chalet was designed to simulate the cabins found in Swiss mountain villages. Today, the rooms can be reserved for overnight guests who make their way on foot or horseback, and through hikers like ourselves can purchase a Gatorade, Snickers, or similar snack, though no beer or soda, much to our disappointment. We had a steep but short hike up the Swift Current Pass, and then what would become my favorite portion of the whole adventure, our long descent back to Many Glacier Village. Along the way, the view would sum up the whole of our time in the backcountry, with enormous waterfalls, high glaciers, stream crossings, steep cliffs, valleys, forests, lakes, and tall brush. A couple miles before we reached the car, we came back to civilization with a visit to the camp store, which renewed our spirit. Clutching cold drinks and souvenirs, we pushed for the final stretch and even came upon Ranger Bob Schuster, who spent almost 50 years sharing with visitors what the area has to teach us. We told him about the bears, the worn latch on the bear box at 50 Mountain, and our concern for the Cattle Queen crossing. He took notes and gave us a smile. Timmy insisted he check our permit. For all the effort it takes to get one, it was satisfying to have someone ensure we were playing by the rules. Joe and I asked him more questions, admiring the sound of his voice and the breadth of his knowledge. Afterwards, we made it to the car. I got a little choked up as we approached the end, aware of the effort it required, the pain we endured, but moreover, reflecting on the laughs we shared, the fears we overcame, and the great time spent with my brothers and our good friend.